This is Straight Talk Live with Yonah Budd on News Talk 1010.
Good evening on a Sunday night here in Toronto. Congratulations to the Ontario government and every other government that's involved, along with the teachers' union, for averting a strike for tomorrow. Man, we just, like I say, you keep hearing me say it all the time. Just got to do a better job when it comes to kids. And the last thing kids need today, especially high school students for the most part, last thing they need to do is go to bed at night not worrying about what's going to be tomorrow. They do anyway. And when worrying about whether there's going to be class or isn't going to be class, how it's going to affect their exams and all this kind of stuff is a huge, huge anxiety draw, right? So good for everybody that made this thing go away. I'm sure there's a lot of parents that can sleep better tonight, that will be able to go to work tomorrow. There'll be doctors back working. There'll be nurses back working, firefighters, police officers. All of those people would have stayed home, man. A lot of those people have children and don't have places to send them on the fly. So if you don't have a place to go or send your kids, you don't go to work, right? You call in, I can't go to work. But these people a lot of these people do things in our world. So it impacts and affects everybody. Because if you're in the emergency room and there's less doctors and less nurses because they're at home taking care of their kids, guess what? The lineup becomes even worse. You're listening to Yonah Budd on Straight Talk Live on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010 on the Bell Talk Radio Network. We talk about stuff. And I am, just so you know who you're talking to, I am the clinical director and the co-founder at the Farm in Stouffville Residential Mental Health Addiction Treatment Center. I'm a private investigator. I specialize in crime related to mental health and addiction. I deal with kids in crisis, ages 13 to 18, 19, depending on the month, who are in crisis and their families are in crisis. I look for missing people, mostly teens, when it's appropriate for me to do not 911. I'm a retired chaplain in the prison system, spent 10 years doing chaplaincy and counseling in the provincial system, did some work in the federal system as well. And I take phone calls from people all day, every day, like you and me and my brother Patrick, who's in the studio with us again tonight, my partner. I got a couple of guests that we're going to talk to tonight about some stuff. But that's why, I want you to call in and talk to me, 416-872-1010, or text me at 71010 to engage. And if you need to reach me at any point to talk about yourself or some loved one who's got some issues, you can reach me at the farm 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have trained staff that are in place to take calls and make sure that I get back to you. 877-353-2777 to do that. So I just want to make a couple of things clear, because we've had a couple of text messages from people who keep referring to this as a commercial for the farm, and it's one big commercial, and what am I doing here? So I'm here to see if I can make a difference, to see if I can help some people out there, and we do. We've impacted hundreds of people since the show started last January, many of whom I never see. Very few end up actually coming to the farm, but we help them anyway. We do what we can. So this isn't a commercial. This is an opportunity to help people, and that's why we're here tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about opiate addiction. We're going to talk about drug addiction. We're going to talk about how you come out the other side. And I have a couple of guys here. One young man who's in and out of struggles and doing very well today, on his way to a successful recovery, and another gentleman who's in with us who's fallen from grace, I suppose. He was a physician. I guess technically still is a physician without his license, and it went through a horrible roller coaster ride as it relates to an opiate addiction and the incarceration that ensued after that, and so on. So we're going to talk to these two guys. Dustin Richardson is the first guy, and Darryl Gebien is the other. So we're going to get to them shortly. But the national report, apparent opiate-related deaths in Canada. Stick with me here as I share some of these facts and figures with you. You can interact with me tonight, by the way, 416-872-1010, or text me at 71010 anytime, and share positive stuff if you can, or ask questions, but no haters, please. Really don't need them. Anyway, opiate crisis has affected every part of the country, but there's clear differences in the death rates and substances involved across provinces and territories. The national level key findings below are based on available data reported as of August 30th. So this is real-time data, my friends. The national numbers: more than 12,800 apparent opiate-related deaths occurred between January 2016 and March 2019. Almost 13,000 people in Canada died from opiate-related addiction disease. 3,023 deaths occurred in 2016, 4,120 occurred in 2017, 4,588 occurred in 2018. That's one life lost every 2 hours related to opiates. Yeah, one life lost every 2 hours related to opiates, and people don't want to call it an epidemic. I'm not sure what you have to do to qualify. 1,082 occurred between January and March so far of this year. And the opiate crisis has affected every part of the country, but some provinces and territories have been mostly impacted. Western Canada continues to be the most impacted region in the country, but rates have increased in other regions, including Ontario. Although regional variations exist, a significant increase in rates of apparent opiate-related deaths at the national level was observed between 2016 and June 2017. The rate remains high from 2017 to 2019. Sexes and age groups affected in 2019, January to March, 93% of apparent opiate-related deaths were accidental and unintentional. And we're going to talk to my guests tonight about what that means. That means that people were using with no intention of killing themselves. Lots of people say, well, they wanted to die anyway. Well, no, that's not really the case. Maybe they did, but probably not that time. But these are deaths, the accidental deaths related to tainted street drugs. Western Canada, most accidental deaths, as you know, are 76% of them are related to males. Age group. Age groups patterns also varied by regions. However, the vast majority of deaths were among young and middle-aged adults. Fentanyl and other fentanyl-related substances continue to be the major driver. In 2019, January to March, 82% of accidental apparent opiate deaths involve fentanyl or fentanyl analogs. However, patterns varied by province or territory. Approximately 74% of accidental apparent opiate-related deaths between January 2016 and March 2019 involved one or more types of non-opiate substances. So that can be as simple as marijuana laced with fentanyl and so on. So the statistics go on here and on. And when we come back, we're going to talk to my guests about how we make a difference and what we can do to get on the other side of all of this. So you're listening to Yonah. Make sure you come back. We're going to talk to you in a minute. Stay tuned. Back in a sec.
This is Straight Talk Live with crisis intervention specialist Yonah Budd on News Talk 1010.
Hey there, it's 10:19. Do you know where your children are or your loved ones? If you don't, you need to go find them. If you can't find them, call me right here, right now, 416-872-1010 or text us at 71010. If you think they're in real peril, you need to call 911 immediately. But you got to know where people are, man, especially little ones. You got to know where they are. They're in their rooms, they're at home, they're at their friends' houses. We need to keep track of what's going on, especially when they're talking about kids or anyone else. You know, it could be mom, could be dad, could be somebody that potentially could be at risk. You got to keep your eyes on them and know where they are at all times. So I had shared a whole bunch of statistics with you all about the opiate epidemic. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and truly it is. I mean, I've been doing this work for close to 40 years, and actually a little more than 40 years. I don't date myself. But, you know, we're finding that it's more and more and more entrenched in the addiction world, in the world of mental health and addiction disease, these drugs that are coming up. And the problem is that, you know, people don't know what they're using, right? And I'm getting a message here from someone that says you can never talk too much about addiction. It's all around us. It's everywhere. It's your brother, your sister, it's the guy at work. It's the two guys sitting next to me. You know, one guy's a doctor. The other guy's just a guy that young man who just couldn't get out from under it, but working to do that now. And I'm going to introduce them by way of some stories here. Darryl Gebien is one of our guests tonight, as is Dustin Richardson. So Darryl, he spent years secretly battling an opiate addiction. He was a former emergency room doctor in Barrie, Ontario. It was all in the newspapers and stuff. He started with the painkiller Percocet before moving onto fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opiate. We all know what that is. I opened the door up, and of course I was totally scared, but by the investigator, he was kind. Gebien recalled in a candid interview with CTV News, the investigator just said to me, "Your life is going to change after this day," and he certainly was right about that. So in April 2017, after multiple stints in rehab and free on bail, Gebien was sentenced to prison after pleading guilty to trafficking and forging fake prescriptions to feed his habit. Released in December after serving 8 months of his 2-year sentence, the 48-year-old has been clean for the past 3 years now and is on a crusade to raise awareness about the pains of opiate addiction, and that's why he's here with us tonight. I liked it because it was like a happy pill, he said. After I started progressing and spiraling and taking it more and more frequently, I didn't realize how the addiction had grown quietly, insidiously. To battle his growing symptoms, withdrawal symptoms, Gebien began wearing fentanyl patches, and while working in the emergency room department at Barrie's Royal Victoria Hospital, Gebien's addiction quickly surpassed the relief even the patches would allow. He cut them up into small patches, started to smoke them. So the problem is when you smoke a street patch and you don't know what's in it, you get the hot part of it. It means you're getting a whole bunch of fentanyl. If it's if it's a street patch, if it's something you're getting from Shoppers Drug Mart, it's a little easier to find an even corner, so to speak. So it's a problem, and the reason that people are dying is because there's no way to really measure the fentanyl that's out there. When Gebien was finally caught, he was charged with 144 counts of forgery and trafficking in controlled substance. But more painful than prison and losing his career is the toll his ordeal caused on his family. His former wife now lives with their children in the Maritimes. The rest of me is recovering, but they're still growing up and their dad's not there. He said that's the part that hurts the worst. Darryl, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. Dustin Richardson, quick story. Dustin and I go back close to 3 years. I remember sitting at the end of his hospital bed in an emergency situation where he was hanging on for his life after being clean and sober for 6 months, 7 months, I think, maybe longer, he'll tell us, and decided that he could have just one smash, right? Just one small little bit of heroin that he picked up by accident. He just bumped into a guy, so to speak. And it was a hot shot. It was very little, but tons of fentanyl. Ended up overdosing, being caught up in a curling crouch kind of position. Ended up his legs atrophied. Story goes on and on. If you were to read it, it's in the paper as well. He was in the Barrie newspaper and been on some news pieces here. He's also an advocate, speaks along with the Canadian Mental Health Association up in the Simcoe area. He's becoming an addiction counselor. We're close friends. We have a friendship relationship that grew out of a therapy relationship, and I can't be prouder of him. Thank you for being here tonight, Dustin.
Thank you very much.
So, boys, here's the story. We got a smart doctor, a guy that went to school, grew up in a decent neighborhood, decent family, all that kind of stuff. Dustin, great mother, great family, all the good stuff going for you. We'll start with you, Darryl. What took you to the other side? Where was the pain? Was it a physical pain, or was it, as we talked about offline here, was it a mental pain that you found the opiates were able to subside?
It started with back pain and a prescription for Percocet, but it's almost the first time I took it, I liked it immediately.
What did you like about it?
So in medicine, you say the euphoric effects, but what that means, it felt good. It was like an immediate antidepressant to me. I didn't worry about my problems. It helped treat the physical pain, but also took away any sort of emotional distress as well. And that I liked it immediately, and that's important for people to know. If they get those sort of symptoms, if they feel so good when they first take it, and that's the red flags are going now, right? And that they're at a higher risk. So,
but you're a smart guy. You're educated. You're a doctor, an emergency room doctor at that, right? Yeah. Saw all kinds of addicts coming in over the years, for sure, and all your residencies and so on. You knew that second pill, especially if they had that euphoric feeling. I mean, that's on the checklist, as you say, of things that indicate this isn't good, right? If you're taking something and it's giving you a different kind of feeling than you're expecting, and you like it, not a good feeling.
Yeah, in hindsight, it's
of course
2020 hindsight, right? But it's a very insidious, slow-growing thing. So in the very beginning, I was using it for back pain only,
right?
And
you convinced yourself that you had more pain on certain days than others. I'm sure,
maybe,
right?
yeah. But I mean, that first prescription stayed on the medicine cabinet shelf for a year.
Okay.
And then towards the end is when I thought, okay, well. I had some back pain, I had some other issues going on, but I started relying on it more, and over just at the very end of that first prescription, I took it more of an inappropriate way. It was this risk-taking, adventure-seeking sort of behavior, I guess, and so that's where I kind of made the step, and it's completely regrettable.
I get
back
that.
5 years later.
I get that later.
But so I was prone right away. I knew I was prone, but it didn't. You would think my own knowledge would prevent me from making more reckless decisions.
It's stronger than that, though, isn't it? The addiction is just stronger.
That's the thing to demonstrate. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do
Right.
for a living, how smart you are.
Right.
Actually, I find the people who are more intelligent end up getting themselves into more trouble, it seems.
Dustin Richardson, recovering addict and soon to be an addiction counselor, a speaker, an advocate for harm reduction and so on. you know, we and I have an extensive relationship, so I'm going to ask you questions I know the answers of. But for you, it was a different story. You've been numbing emotional and psychological pain pretty much your whole life, right?
Yeah.
Kind of grew out of teenage life to now, right?
Yeah, it started early for sure.
How'd you make that switch from smoking weed and having the odd beer to getting really messed up? Was it gradual, like
It was
Darryl
gradual,
just
like
said?
like Darryl just said about like his the opioids and how it kind of sneaks up on you. You don't recognize it as it's happening, right?
Right.
For me and myself, and just with my addiction in general, it was a slow, gradual process that, you know, I really didn't know where the wheels fell off, but by the time I recognized they weren't on the vehicle anymore, I was long gone and off to the races. Right?
So that point of no recovery, guys, I'll throw this to Dustin first, but that point of no recovery, when you realize you're going down that rabbit hole and you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, you kind of grab onto your butt and kind of, you know, hope that it's going to be a smooth ride, or were there parts of it for either one of you where you were sort of hoping maybe it didn't get up from the next smash or the next high?
There was times,
like any of the times you overdosed, and you overdosed a whole bunch of times. How many times? We talked about this before.
I've been hit with naloxone upwards of 20 times.
Right.
Were all those severe overdoses that I wouldn't have woken up from? I'm not sure, but nonetheless, I've been administered naloxone roughly about 20 times over my opioid addiction.
And even after being in hospital and recovering with leg surgery so you could have use of your legs and all the rehab you went through, even after that, right, you still ended up having some, you know, minor relapse, so to speak, right? That again wasn't enough. So I guess what I want people to understand, both of you, is the depth of the depth of the hold, if you will, if not, maybe the English isn't right here, but the severity of the hold that these drugs have on you. Is such that people, you know, don't understand. You can't, you know, when you talk to family members like I do all the time, you know, Dustin and I and his mom have an excellent relationship, and I'm sure Darryl, same for you. When you talk to family members, they say, well, why can't you, you know, just stop,
Yeah.
just put them down, just stop. You know, it's not the right thing to do. Just stop. Darryl?
If I could just say something. I mean,
Yeah, please.
We don't. It comes on insidiously, like insidious. It sneaks up. People don't realize they're addicted until after the fact. They only know it when they stop taking the medication or the drug. Then when they stop it, then the next 24 hours afterwards is when withdrawal symptoms starts kicking in.
Right.
And so that's how I discovered I was addicted. I didn't realize until I stopped, and then I started feeling sick, going through symptoms, and then realized quite late on that, oh my gosh, this is a withdrawal syndrome. I didn't know. I just thought I was feeling under the weather. I had a bad flu, but I was really depressed, really irritable. And so by then, that point is like, oh my gosh, I'm addicted. I didn't even know I was. So that's important. People get trapped, and you've passed the point of no return, is what you were saying.
30 seconds or less, same thing, Dustin?
Yeah. Especially with opioid addiction, the physical dependency on it, right?
Right.
That's a key note of, like, yeah, I'm addicted, but that's physical dependence. You're usually addicted long before that mentally, you know?
Okay, so we're going to come back from break and continue to have this conversation. 1,082 is the number of people that have parent-related deaths by opiate-related substances. 11.6% of the population per 100,000. It's a huge number. So pay attention. We're going to be back. We're going to make this stuff work. We're going to find some answers and give some people some hope and some ideas on how to change. This is Yonah on Straight Talk Live. We'll be back in a minute.
It's time to get help. It's time to tell your story. You're listening to Straight Talk Live with crisis intervention specialist Yonah Budd on News Talk 1010.
Yo, we're welcome back. I have a message from someone who says I need to slow down and take a few breaths. So, hope everybody's rested now. But we're going to move along here, and we're going to try to keep things moving as quickly as we can. I hope everybody can keep up, but I will try to breathe and slow down. Thank you so much to all of the text messengers. We have another one that says, thank you for bringing attention to this. Thanks to 1010 for having the show on. Someone says, addiction but rock bottom caused our life to flip upside down. We're in the best place of our lives. We grew stronger, but we acknowledged the past. Some great text messages. Thank you all so much for reaching out. I'm with Darryl Gebien and Dustin Richardson. Darryl, we're go back to you here for a sec. So we're going to talk. I want to move on and start to get into kind of the recovery process. I think the stories are played out enough. I mean, and we were having a conversation offline here about the difference between mental illness and mental unwellness. I think it's a very fine line, but you have to agree, Darryl, that people who find themselves in deep addiction, the deep lines of self-medication or any other at-risk behavior, whether it's gambling, texting, sexting, eating disorders, all of those things, isolation and so on, depression, anxiety, all those other kinds of things. Typically, certainly in my years of practice and close to 2,700 patients, I would suggest that I don't think I've ever met anybody with an addiction disease that didn't have an unwell mental health scenario at some level. And seems to be the younger, the more mental illness, the older seems to more mental unwellness. But that's just, my own silly statistics. What do you think?
We were talking about how mental health issues predispose people to addiction, and addiction is a form of mental illness. And this is I completely agree with that. As physicians, we would talk about predisposing like a pre-existing mental health issue like bipolar, depression, anxiety, right. Post-traumatic stress. Right. But in my own personal story, I didn't have any of those, but I did have poor mental wellness. What's the difference? So that's the thing. Like,
so describe the difference really quickly for Dustin and I and everyone that's listening. How do you define the difference between mental illness and mental wellness?
So poor mental wellness is the isolation, for example. I lived in Barrie. I didn't have friends that I was speaking to. I didn't have a mentor. I wasn't sharing the issues and speaking up about what was going on in my life. So that's poor mental wellness. I didn't have the pre-existing mental illness per se of the conditions I just mentioned. So there's a common thread of addiction.
What were the opiates settling down for you?
So the anxiety that was going on in my life.
So you had some anxiety.
So it was anxiety, but not considered like clinical anxiety.
Oh, okay. I forgot I'm talking to a doctor.
Yeah. So anxiety is rampant. I mean, it's society. It is the number one thing that affects us all. Anxiety and depression. So whether it's clinical anxiety or not, it doesn't matter. But there was issues going on in my life. I was not coping well with the stresses, and I was taking it out on myself, and I was self-medicating to try to make it all go away.
Dustin, sound familiar?
Yeah, very. Like you spoke about the anxieties, right? And like just listening to that, and like I think back in my personal life and stuff like that, I struggled with those things, those anxieties from an early age, and it was simple things like interacting with others, just the general stresses of life that goes on that I don't think a child should necessarily have.
But they all do, right? I mean,
they all do.
Every teenager I see has high anxiety at the very least.
Yeah.
I think it's anxious to be a teenager, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some level of that is normal, right?
Right.
Like, of course. But for myself, I think that was, it was much more of a problem than I was able to recognize back then being a child, but then that anyone was able to recognize within me. And I think I struggled with those anxieties from a young age. And then slowly I found substances helped with that. And I started using substances at a young age, 12, 13, marijuana, alcohol and stuff. And then once I found opioids, those anxieties were gone, and that became my drug of choice. And that's what helped me get through.
But the relapses that I know of, and then we'll come to you, Darryl, too, to talk about any kind of relapse scenario you might have had. But Dustin, I know we've been up and down the roller coaster a whole bunch of times, when we were in treatment together and then after and before. So, the times that you actually went out and relapsed, if you will, those one last shot kind of experiences, when we've talked about it, there wasn't a lot of anxiety and stuff going on at the time, really. Or did we miss that mark?
I think anxiety is something I struggle with day in, day out.
But you didn't choose to use because you were having a high anxiety day.
Anxiety, maybe not. I think anxiety to me it's always been a big part of my life. And to say that I went out and used because I was having a high anxiety day, I don't know what that would have looked like. Maybe it was. Maybe I struggle with these anxieties of life going on. And then maybe that day there was something that said, hey, that was enough. I need to release this. I need to let go. I can't say, but what I can say is opioids is such a strong substance, right? And it calms everything.
Strong in
right?
terms of its impact, or the addiction piece of it, like it holds on really
both,
tight.
For sure. You know,
Okay.
because opioids have that physical dependency part that a
Right.
lot of other substances just don't have.
Right.
But the thing for me is opioids allowed me to live my life without all those worries, without all those anxieties, without that depression. And once you became a daily opioid user, like we all have this idea of the heroin addict who's nodding out on the sidewalk, right? Where an everyday opioid user isn't necessarily like that.
Right.
You can go through your day, you can go to work, you can be a doctor for one, and be on opioids and grooving, and nobody really know. And that was the appeal to me to say was I could go out as long as I had the pills or what have you. I could go about my daily business, and everything was just that much easier for me. You know, every interaction. You know, I was a little bit sharper. I was a little bit more quick-witted. You know, I didn't have that butterfly feeling in my stomach like something's wrong.
Right.
I was just kind of floating through life though I thought I should feel doing well in life. You know, like
Darryl, the issue around, I mean, Darryl Gebien is with us here tonight as well. You just listened to Dustin Richardson. Darryl, I hear Dustin talking about it just seemed to make everything easier, and my life made it simpler. But you and I all know, and so does Dustin, and anybody who's had addiction issues know that the scrambling and the hustle and the hiding and the lying and the stealing and the cheating around your daily use creates all kinds of anxiety and aftercare, the depression afterwards, and guilt and remorse and all that. So I'm not sure I buy that it's just an easier way of life because the aftermath, right, Dustin? I mean, and both of you guys, but Darryl in particular, like it's that whole lifestyle. Even when you're showing up in an emergency room, like hiding it, sneaking it, doing all that kind of stuff, had to be anxiety prone, right?
Yeah, this is like the worst depths of an addiction. When somebody's chasing it, their whole life revolves around getting their drug of choice and then worrying about what happens if it runs out.
Right. Where am I going to get the next batch?
Yeah, and that's very consuming and anxiety provoking for sure. I just want to going back a second though, that people use for multiple reasons. We're only talking about the most common one.
Correct.
during my addiction, and Dustin was talking about during his. We're talking about that one time he used afterwards. There could have been many other reasons why people are using. So anxiety is one of them. Another one is just a stress reliever at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Celebrations of some sort. So there's many reasons why people use. So it's important for the listeners to know that.
No. Hang on. Let's be clear. Hang on. Before you cross that line with me, brother, let's be clear that we're not talking about the recreational once a weekend or once every third Saturday, kind of a couple of lines, or pops a perk, or or does an oxy or something. Like, we're not talking about those kind of people tonight.
Yeah,
we're talking about the people who are self-medicating because they can't live in their own skin without it.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
So yeah, we're talking about different ends of the spectrum here. So in the beginning, that's where I was at. Where you're talking about is the deeper, darker part of the addiction, and
the part that's killing everybody, right?
Yeah, but I think one of the ones I want to say is when I relapsed, I had just gone through a 5-week program, and I was grieving the loss of my drug. That sounds crazy, but it's so
sounds
true.
sensible
I
to me,
relapsed the day I left rehab.
So much
I was
for the
not
rehab.
ready. I was not ready to stop. So that's like, if you want to talk about later on in the story, further down the depths of addiction, that would be it.
So Dustin, that's a good line here with the last minute or so we have before we go to break. Being ready. So we've been at this a couple of times, you and I, maybe 2 or 3, and being ready. So you've been ready a bunch of times. What makes this particular last 6 months different?
It's recovery is a process, right? And what makes this time different? When it's such a process, and you've had so many relapses, and you've been to so many treatment centers, and you've been doing everything you're supposed to, what makes this time different? To tell you the truth, I don't really know, other than I've got myself surrounded with some old people that were really important to me, and they're still in my life. But I found some new people and a new support group and a new way of living, like what I do with the Canadian Mental Health and Addiction Organization. They've been a big support and a big difference changer this time.
Yeah, but what made you more? You're talking about external stuff in the last 30 seconds here. What made you more ready? If that's even the right question to ask you.
It's, I don't know what made me more ready. You know, it was just this like learning curve. Unfortunately, I went the hard road. I have multiple relapses. I have multiple overdoses. And I've been through every situation that you could think of that would make a person want to stop, and I've kept using.
Right.
One thing I do give myself is I never stop trying.
There you go.
I keep pushing, and even if I slip tomorrow, I'd like to think that I would get back on the horse and keep trying for this recovery thing. And recovery is just bettering yourself one day at a time. I'm not talking about multiple days and months, years of abstinence. I'm just looking to be happy. I'm just looking to be comfortable in my own skin, and do this recovery thing called life.
So when we come back, great line about being hopeful and, one day at a time and going through this a little bit at a time. This is Yonah, Darryl, and Dustin with Patrick in the studio. We'll be back in a minute. Straight Talk Live on In-Depth Radio News Talk 1010. I love you guys. See you in a sec.
This is Straight Talk Live with Yonah Budd on News Talk 1010.
Hey, welcome back. I'm here with Dustin Richardson and Darryl Gebien. We're talking about addiction and opiate-related stuff and their lives. The one thing I want to relate to, because Dustin and I were having a conversation over coffee before the show, and one of the things he was talking about is counting days in recovery if you're in AA or NA, and the impact that has. And the best way I can relate really quickly here, and then I'll maybe not so quickly because I got this guy with the text message that wants me to breathe and go slow. There you go, buddy. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about, so when I'm coming down and I'm driving my car and I use Waze as my navigation device, I set the location and I know what time I want to get here. And then if I get backed up in traffic, Waze starts moving my time to what time I'm actually getting there. So it actually tells me how late I'm going to be. I find myself turning it off, right? Because it creates great anxiety for me, which I have anyway, right? But it tells me how late I'm going to be. I'm going 3 minutes late, 4 minutes late. This is ridiculous. And I start to sweat and, go through this whole chest pounding thing, right? I start to do my breathing exercise. So, Dustin, you and I were talking about the counting your days in recovery and, how many days clean, and that's kind of like really not a good sign. So if we looked at you, we talked about it. You have 355 clean days out of 365 clean days. I think that's a much more significant number as you shared that with me, and maybe, Darryl, you agree with me. That's a much more significant number than I had 10 days in the last year where I relapsed and then reset myself and then went back. So really quickly, because I want to kind of get to talking to people about some hope and some ideas and thoughts coming from you guys as to what people can do if they have a loved one or themselves and they're suffering from opiate addiction or really any addiction per se. I'll start it off with Darryl.
I think communication is essential. Addiction is an illness of isolation. And that's where the mental badness kicks in as well. So it's important to get communication open and start speaking honestly. It's tough, though. I know when I was in my active addiction, I would do anything to hide the magnitude of how deep I was in.
Right.
But isolation is the enemy, and getting people to start talking about it and then getting the appropriate help from there. With opioids, there's lots of new treatments available with opioid replacement therapy. So things like buprenorphine, that's the proper name, but Suboxone is the trade name.
Right, methadone, Suboxone, those are the two anti-antagonists, right?
Right, and so the idea is you remove the component of the addiction where a person is chasing the high and chasing the drugs. So we're talking about the anxiety that's caused by trying to chase and get your drugs.
Right.
So it puts the person in the driver's seat of their life. They no longer are fighting withdrawal syndrome. They can now go on and live their life.
You're talking about these replacement medications.
Opioid replacement. So that's the treatment and the hope that people can have is to.
But you really have to deal with the underlying stuff, right, Dustin? I mean, we'll kick it over to you. It's really the underlying mental unease or unwellness, if whatever term you want to use.
It is a first step.
Right. I think that's really important. If you need some support with methadone or Suboxone for a short period of time, I support that, from a clinical perspective. But Dustin, people, you're. I just see you as this warrior that just keeps fighting. What do you tell families? I mean, your mother was incredible support, still is, stood by you through all of it. Her and I spent a lot of time in hospital together, waiting for you to recover. What do you tell people who are either in the midst of their own addiction, either with opiates or other things, where they just can't get out? They seem to feel trapped, and they need to find a little bit of hope. Let's give them some hope tonight.
So to give hope, I mean, like you said about communication, I think a big part is just start talking about it, especially in the family dynamic, and talking about it openly and freely without shame, and especially without shaming the addict, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, opioid addiction, very few people get it on the first try. Very few people put it down and never pick it up again. Some people routinely pick it up, and the families just want to give up on them because it's simply like, come on, like,
why can't you just stop?
Why can't you just stop? Like, enough's enough. Like, you've had your relapses,
Right.
And I've been I have a great mother, like you said, who's been by my side through this whole journey, and God bless her. I've put her through, where I'm back a few times over.
Right. But what do you tell people? What do you tell their families? Never give up?
I mean, never give up. Yeah. And like, love them. Sometimes you have to love them from afar,
Right.
But don't give up on them. Some of the best people in my life today are people that have been on the street, been homeless, down and out. If somebody had given up on them, they wouldn't be the person they are today,
Darryl, we talked quickly. I mentioned that we're talking about a woman who chose addiction over her children, and you jumped all over me. 30 seconds or less. It's not a choice, right?
No, addiction's not a choice. People, it's an illness. We have to understand this is a fundamental illness where our brains are hijacked, the neurotransmission, the neurotransmitters, the chemistry, everything is off.
Right.
And so this is a sick person. So we can't, in this case, the woman chose her drug of choice over her children. Anybody in the situation knows what the right choice is. Of course, it's the children first.
If you're thinking
addiction is so powerful.
Right.
That's what that demonstrates.
Right.
That's the only way to look at that. Clean cut. Addiction can be so powerful. People are compelled to do things against their better knowledge. As a physician, myself included, I knew it was wrong. But the addiction it hijacks the part of the brain, the primitive brain, which is the same part of the brain when it comes to breathing, primordial survival things, drinking fluids, eating, sex. And so you can't apply higher cerebral functions of like judgment and insight, which are the technical stuff, like when it's just survival. Addiction is a thing about survival. It's that powerful. The other thing, just to throw in there quickly, is with families, it's to let them know it's a tough, long process. Firm boundaries are needed, but to understand it's a long process. A person going into rehab is just the beginning.
So we're going to be back again with these guys for sure. This has been a really enjoyable show for me. I learned a lot. Hope you out there learned a lot. We'll see you next Saturday night. Darryl Gebien and Dustin Richardson, thank you both. We'll have you both back. We'll do this again. God bless you both. Thank you all for listening tonight. Thank you, Patrick, for being in the studio and making it a great show. And make it a safe week, everybody. Peace.